Hello, my name is Richard King. I'm Head of Research at Anderson's The Farm Business Consultants. I'll be doing a short piece on the effect of the loss of plant protection products on the UK agricultural industry and the wider economy. This was a report that was commissioned by the NFU, AIC and the CPA, Crop Protection Association, which we did last September. And it's really to influence policymakers to try and change the direction of policy, both at a UK, but perhaps more importantly, a EU level. So the report was looking at the entire policy environment in which plant protection products are being approved. So unlike some studies that just look at one particular policy, the idea of this was to look at them in the round and try and gauge the kind of overall effect of multiple policies on what we as an industry might have to available in our toolkit over the coming years. So firstly, one of the big changes over the last few years is at EU level in terms of the authorisation process, which comes under the regulation 1107. And the big change here was the move from a risk to a hazard-based criteria for sort of looking at the approvals of plant protection products. So sort of hazard just looks at the intrinsic properties of a chemical rather than how it's used in practice. So an example that's always given is perhaps caffeine in our coffee. Caffeine is, if you have enough of it, a poison, but because it's at low doses, we know how to deal with it. Actually, the risk from it is very minimal. So if you like, plant protection products are being held to a higher standard of proof than many other products that we all use in our day-to-day life. Also an issue at the European level is sort of the guidance that comes along with trying to get approvals through the system. There's a sort of proliferating mass of this which constantly changes, which just makes it a sort of slightly moving playing field for those companies that are trying to get their products approved, and therefore that increases the risk, increases the uncertainty and also increases the cost. So the second big policy driver, perhaps particularly important in the UK, is the Water Framework Directive and all its sort of related legislation, Drinking Water Directive, Groundwater Directive. So perhaps more important in the UK than some other countries. We've got quite a lot of our arable land is under-drained, and therefore what goes on the land tends to reach the watercourses perhaps more quickly than in some other member states, and therefore this issue is sort of slightly more live in the UK than elsewhere. Neonicotinoid restrictions that we've seen put on over the last couple of years, also affecting the plant protection product armoury. And lastly, we've got sort of UK specific issues about the implementation, the guidelines, and this particularly impacts on the sort of minor crops as they're known, perhaps slightly unfairly known as that, because they are important in value terms and in kind of marketing terms. But the extensions of authorisations for minor use is pretty much a UK level, and there's issues around those as well. So we sort of collected the best available evidence that we could find in terms of the actives that may be lost, and there's about 250 of them currently approved for use in the UK. And of that, we ranked them low, medium and high in terms of the likelihood of them being lost to the farming industry over probably, sort of a medium term, so 5, 6, 7 year period. So that gave us sort of 87 that were sitting in the medium and high category and 40 that sat in the high likelihood of loss category. That's the sort of breakdown of the sort of types of active substances that may be lost from the high. So we've got some slug killers at the top, methiocarb is on its way out, metaldehyde could well be restricted. Herbicides, pendimethalin for example, is a key one that may be lost. We've got fungicides, the azole group is under threat, and at the bottom the insecticides where cypermethrin would be a key one that may be lost in the future. So that was a sort of assessment of where we might be going in terms of losses, and then for our economic analysis, we've only looked at the high likelihood of loss chemicals. So we haven't done a worst case scenario. It's really meant to be what is, probability wise likely to be the most likely to be lost. So we think it's a fair assessment of what we could be facing over the next few years. So we took what might happen on a crop by crop basis with the loss of those key active substances. We didn't do all crops. We were just chosen to do a sort of specific key sector of them. And those are the kind of yield losses that we came up with. Obviously there's a range around those, but we've put a sort of single figure on them for easier communication of the messages. So those are the kind of losses that we thought may well be resulting from the reductions in the toolkit that we've got. You'll see at the bottom, carrots minus 25%. Really that's to do with loss of control of weeds. That's the key thing, both grass weeds, broadleaf weeds and volunteers. For example, some of the products we think were going to be lost are linuron, pendimethalin and also flumoxazine as well. So those are key ones to control those kind of weeds that you see in carrot crops. We believe that without those key elements we could see those kind of reductions in yields. Obviously some slug control issues as well, probably less so in terms of fungicides and sort of other elements, but it's certainly the herbicides that's the key losses when we're looking at the carrot crop. Also some price effects built into the model as well. There will be a drop in UK supply, as we can see by these percentage reductions. All things being equal, that might see the price go up, but also quality issues are likely to be created if we haven't got some of the key plant protection products, which will push the price down. So built within the model are kind of multiple factors moving the price in different directions depending on the particular crop under discussion. So as we said, we think this is realistic, not a worst case scenario. The details behind all of this are contained within the report, so that is the report that's been published. Please get in touch with either ourselves at the Anderson Centre, NFU, CPA, AIC if you would like a full copy of that. So then we kind of looked at those are the physical changes from the losses of the key ingredients. So then we went on to sort of plug those into a spreadsheet model to see what the financial effects might be. Big screen of figures, so don't expect to go through these all line by line, but basically our base was looking at a 5-year average, the 5 years leading up to 2013, and then we just compared that with a sort of post-loss of these plant protection products scenarios, which is on the right hand side. So if we just pick out a few key figures from that, we've got the gross value added of the industry dropping by 20%, and then if we come down to the bottom looking at total income from farming, and total income from farming is effectively the profit of UK Agriculture PLC. So previous to the losses, it was about £4.8 billion. We see it reducing to only a little bit over £3 billion, so a 36% reduction in the profit of farming as a result of these changes. Quite a sort of few things built into there. As you'll see, it's not just the output side, there will be some cost changes as well, and they've come through into the model. We're happy to kind of discuss elements of the model with anybody who's interested. So that's the sort of financial side of things. Just looking at cropping changes, the areas of the winter combinable crops do tend to drop because of sort of lower control options, an increase in spring cropping, and probably more fallow and more temporary grass as well to help with the rotations, sort of more cultural control rather than chemical control. Roots and veg, these minor crops, if we want to use that word, do decline by quite a lot. They're high value, therefore perhaps under more import pressure than some of the main broadacre crops. The consumer has got very used to high quality, high standards, particularly of visual appearance, and if the UK producer or even the EU producer can't deliver that, they're high value enough that they will be simply imported from elsewhere. So probably some quite large cropping changes in there. For example, something like vining peas, where we kind of really do expect perfectly round green spheres within our frozen pea packet. Very difficult to produce without the chemical armoury that we've currently got, and something like that may simply be totally imported rather than a domestic production. Some other crops, apples for example, down by a lot as well. Why does that happen? Well, in certain locations the pest and disease pressure is just so much that it's uneconomic to grow the crop. Marketable yields will be lower, so your actual yields might not drop much, but the stuff, the quantity that consumers are prepared to buy, particularly in these kind of fruit and veg sectors, might be quite a lot lower, and therefore crops become uneconomic. And I've mentioned that if that is the case, then the import competition would be quite fierce. So wider effects, all very well saying yes, it will have an effect on farming, but perhaps that doesn't get much traction with policymakers and politicians, so the report attempts to sort of spread it out a little wider. The agri-food sector does make up 7% of the economy and 13% of all employment, and obviously the farming industry is the kind of bedrock of that. It provides the raw materials for the rest of the food supply chain. Food and drink manufacturers have a much larger gross value added than the agricultural sector itself, and if the raw materials aren't available domestically, then quite a lot of that processing is likely to kind of disappear in the medium term. Probably not in the first few years, factories won't shut down, but when people are thinking about where to put their investment in the future, they will go where the raw materials are. The raw materials are bulky, low value, so you put your manufacturing sites close to those, and then you transport the high value finished products around. So likely to be an offshoring of the food manufacturing industry if we've got less raw materials. And our report suggests that that could see the losses up to 40,000 jobs in that food manufacturing sector. Also, it will be a smaller agricultural industry, so all things being equal, it will need to purchase a lower amount of inputs, and that has an effect on the agricultural supply industry as well. You can see perhaps up to 4,000 jobs lost in that sector as well. Marginally higher food prices. We've assumed within the report that there is sufficient food in the world market that nobody is going to go hungry, that it won't tighten markets to such an effect that food prices in the UK react, but simply the need to import them rather than have them produced domestically will add a little bit to food costs. And there's also an element of research and development, high-paying, high-skilled, intellectually challenging jobs that are currently undertaken in the UK. If we are not, if the UK and the EU aren't really a favourable environment to biotech, agricultural production more generally, then again those jobs will probably tend to disappear to other parts of the world. And then sort of throwing it out even wider than that, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN suggests that 840 million people in the world still go hungry on a day-to-day basis. Europe, the UK, has favourable soils and climate for food production, so there's a moral dimension in terms of, should we be constraining our food production when the world needs more to eat. Lots of sort of talk about alternatives to traditional plant protection products, things like biopesticides, integrated pest management, precision farming, even organic as an alternative to PPP. All of these we tend to think have their place. We mention them in the report, and they are useful adjuncts to the technology. But really a lot of these need to be seen in partnership with traditional plant protection products. If you stripped away the armoury completely, then it would be very difficult for these technologies to kind of take up the slack in total. So a rounded approach, taking a pick and mix to the best that all of these can offer, is probably the best way forward for the industry. So the conclusion of the report was that the sort of current direction of travel in terms of policy is almost certain going to lead to considerable economic and perhaps even social losses, with the gains in terms of environmental protection, consumer protection, pretty minimal and perhaps even non-existent. So this is the message from our report, that policymakers do need to have another look at this issue and perhaps turn around what they're doing. Thank you very much for your time.